Assalamu alaikum and welcome everyone. I am Tozul Islam Naim, undergraduate student of Business Administration at Shah Jalal University of Science and Technology. Today we are going to delve into a fascinating topic, elasticity and tax incidence, and explore how it affects both buyers and sellers in a market under the chapter The Measurement of Elasticity. Tax incidence. Tax incidence, simply put, refers to who ultimately bears the burden of tax, meaning who ends up paying more due to the tax being implemented. It is a crucial concept in economics and as it determines who ultimately ends up paying more due to the implementation of taxes. Understanding tax incidence helps economists and policymakers analyze the effects of taxes on various stakeholders and make informed decisions about taxation policies. Types of tax. Tax can be classified into two main types, direct taxes and indirect taxes. Direct taxes, such as income tax, property tax, etc., is one that is paid directly by the taxpayer to the government. On the other hand, indirect tax, such as value-added tax, sales tax, etc., is one that is collected from businesses but ultimately borne by consumers through the price of goods and services. Now, the question has arrived is who pays the tax? The tax is paid by public where public are individual and firms. Shifting of tax. The tax shifting can occur in two ways. First is full shift of payment and second is partial shift of payment. Full shift of payment means where the full tax is paid by the buyers and partial shift of payment where the burden is divided between sellers and buyers. Now, let's consider an example to illustrate tax incidence in action. Imagine you are buying a DVD. The price of the DVD before adding tax is $15 and after adding tax is $16. Before adding tax, you pay $15, but after tax, you end up paying $15.50. Similarly, sellers receive $15 before tax and $14.50 after tax. Although the full tax was placed on the seller, they paid only one half of it. Although none of the tax was placed on buyers, they paid one half of it too. This simple example highlights how the burden of tax is divided between buyers and sellers. The relationship of elasticity and tax. The, the full payment of or partial payment of taxes is dependent on the slope of the supply curve or demand curve. And as the slope is related to elasticity, the tax is also related to elasticity. The incidence of tax is closely related to the elasticity of demand and supply curve. Elasticity measures the responsiveness of quantity demanded or supplied to changes in price. Demand elasticity and tax incidence. The relationship between demand elasticity and tax incidence is when demand curve is elastic, consumers are quick to adjust their purchasing behavior in response to price changes. As a result, if taxes lead to price increases, producers find it challenges to pass on these costs entirely to consumers without losing significant sales. Hence, producers absorb more of the tax burden. Conversely, when demand is inelastic, consumers are less sensitive to price variation, so producer can raise price more without suffering a substantial decreases in demand. Consequently, consumers ends up bearing a large proportion of the tax burden. To visualize this concept, let's consider two scenarios, one with less elastic demand curve and another with more elastic demand curve. In less elastic demand curve, we can see that consumers in less elastic demand curve, we can see that consumer bears the higher proportion of tax burden, which is $15, and sellers bear the lower portion of tax burden, which is $5. Similarly, in more elastic demand curve, consumer pays less portion of tax burden, which is $5, and sellers pays the higher portion of tax burden, which is $15. The, real, the supply curve and tax incidence. The relationship between elasticity of the tax incidence and supply curve is that when the supply curve is more elastic, indicating the producer can easily adjust their production level in response to price changes. Consumer typically bear a higher proportion of tax burden. Conversely, when the supply curve is less elastic, meaning that producers have limited ability to adjust production in response to price changes, they end up bearing a greater portion of tax burden. To visualize this concept, let's consider two scenarios. One with more elastic supply curve and second is less elastic supply curve. In more elastic supply curve, we can see that the consumers pays the higher portion of tax burden with $15 and suppliers pays lower portion of tax burden with $5. Similarly, in less elastic supply curve, the consumer pays less portion of tax burden with $5 and supplier pays the maximum portion of tax burden with $15. So we can say that in more elastic supply curve, the consumer pays more taxes, and in less elastic supply curve, the supplier pays higher tax burden. This concludes the topic, and I trust that the topic has been clearly conveyed. And if you find it beneficial, I kindly request you to like, share, and comment, as well as subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you, everyone.